Imagine walking across a bridge, but instead of just crossing water, you're walking through an entire neighborhood. Shops on both sides. Houses stacked 3, 4, sometimes 5 stories high. People living their entire lives suspended above a raging river. The smell of bread baking mixing with the Thames below. The constant rumble of carts and horses. And here's the mad bit: this wasn't some futuristic fantasy. This was real life in 1600s London, and it was absolutely bonkers. I've taken centuries-old paintings and engravings, fed them through modern AI, and brought this lost world back to life in ways the original artists could never have imagined. What you're about to see is young just history. It's the beating heart of a city that was already becoming one of the most important places on Earth. So buckle up, because we're about to walk through a London that would blow your mind. Let us start with something I genuinely had no idea about before diving into this research. Old London Bridge. And when I say I didn't know enough about it, I mean I had absolutely no clue just how extraordinary this structure actually was. By the 1600s, Old London Bridge wasn't just a way to cross the Thames. It was an entire community, living and working above the water. Think about that for a second. This was on a bridge with a few buildings on. This was a densely packed street that happened to span a river. Houses, shops, warehouses, even chapels, all crammed together so tightly that from a distance you would not even realize you were looking at a bridge. You'd think you were looking at just another crowded London street, except this one was floating above the Thames. The engineering alone was mental. The bridge rested on 19 narrow stone arches, each supported by massive stone piers driven into the riverbed. Now here's where it gets properly dangerous. These piers were so wide and so numerous that they restricted the Thames tidal flow dramatically. The water had to squeeze through these narrow gaps, creating powerful, violent currents underneath. Trying to navigate a boat through those arches was genuinely life-threatening. The water would surge and swirl unpredictably, and accidents happened constantly. Experienced river workers knew which arches were safest, which times of day to attempt passage, and Ebb and Tennant was a gamble every single time. But above all that chaos, life just carried on. Buildings rose several stories high, often jutting out over the roadway below so far that the upper floors from opposite sides nearly touched. Residents lived above the constant thunder of carts, the clip-clop of horses, and the endless stream of pedestrians crossing between the city of London and South. Fire was an ever-present threat. Imagine timber buildings packed that closely together, with open flames for cooking and heating. Congestion was absolutely unavoidable, and yet people chose to live there generation after generation. Why? Because Old London Bridge was prime real estate. Being on the bridge meant being at the absolute center of London's commerce and movement. You were quite literally suspended between two halves of one of Europe's largest cities. The rent reflected that to only those who could afford it, or those whose trades benefited from the location, could secure a spot. Now, let's talk about what lay beneath. The Thames wasn't just some scenic backdrop, it was London's motorway, its main arterial route for absolutely everything. Barges loaded with grain, timber arriving from the forests, coal from Newcastle, cloth from the countryside, imported goods from across Europe and beyond, all of it moved along the Thames. Ferries shuttled people back and forth constantly because, and this is crucial, until the 18th century, Old London Bridge was the only permanent crossing of the Thames in central London. The only one. The river connected London to England's interior, to Europe's ports, to the vast Atlantic trade networks that were beginning to reshape the world. Standing on Old London Bridge meant standing at a point where local London life and global trade literally intersected beneath your feet. Here's something absolutely fascinating. In severe winters, the restricted flow beneath the bridge's arches actually helped the Thames freeze over. During these rare periods, and we're talking maybe once or twice in a generation, Londoners would walk onto the ice below the bridge. Frost fairs were held on the frozen Thames, with merchants setting up stalls, people playing games, even roasting oxen on the ice. It was a striking, almost surreal contrast to the danger the river usually represented. The northern entrance to the bridge was approached through the area beside St. Magnus, the Martyrs' Church, which you can still visit today, by the way. By the mid-1700s, the bridge had deteriorated so badly that officials finally decided to clear and remodel it. Between 1756 and 1762, The buildings that had crowded Old London Bridge for centuries were gradually demolished, clearing the crossing for the first time in living memory. But here's what makes Old London Bridge truly remarkable. It wasn't just engineering, it was lived space. It functioned simultaneously as infrastructure, marketplace, neighborhood, and symbol of London itself. Kings and commoners crossed it. Traders and laborers worked upon it. Newcomers arriving in London from the continent or from England's countryside first encountered the city at this narrow, crowded, overwhelming crossing. Was it crowded? Absolutely. Dark. Definitely. Often unsanitary. Without question. It slowed traffic, bottlenecked trade, and posed constant risks to everyone who lived and worked there. Yet for centuries, it remained utterly indispensable. Sometimes I genuinely wish I could step back and experience this place as it once was, even just for a single day. For now, these AI reconstructions are as close as any of us can get to that impossible dream. Right, let's shift westward for a moment. This is Buckingham House in the late 1600s and early 1700s, long before anyone called it Buckingham Palace. Originally built as a private townhouse on the western edge of London, it stood well away from the city's crowded, filthy core. It was surrounded by open land and gardens, marking the boundary between urban London and the countryside beyond. This was a reminder that even as London grew denser by the year, its limits were still clearly defined. You could stand at Buckingham House and see where the city ended and rural England began. Now, let's talk about September 1666, because what happened then changed London forever. London was struck by one of the most catastrophic fires in its entire history. It started small, a bakery on Pudding Lane, a careless spark, nothing that seemed unmanageable at first. But London, in 1666, was built almost entirely of timber. Streets were narrow, buildings were packed impossibly close together, and the late summer had been dry. That small blaze spread and spread and spread, becoming an unstoppable inferno that consumed everything in its path. Picture this: Ludgate in flames, with old St. Paul's Cathedral visible in the distance, its iconic square tower already threatened by the advancing fire. Within hours, even this massive medieval landmark, one of the largest churches in Europe, would be completely consumed. The lead roof melted and poured down the walls like water. The stone itself cracked and shattered from the intense heat. Another view looks across the Thames near Tower Wharf on the evening of September 4th. London appears as a continuous wall of flame stretching along the horizon. To the left, you can make out London Bridge, miraculously still standing. To the right, the Tower of London narrowly escapes destruction, and burning at the center of the skyline, old St. Paul's Cathedral, the heart of medieval London, being utterly destroyed. In just a few days, something like 80% of the medieval city was reduced to ash and rubble. 13,000 houses gone, 87 churches destroyed, over 70,000 people left homeless. The devastation was almost incomprehensible. Yet here's the thing: the Great Fire, as it came to be known, marked a turning point. It cleared centuries of dense, medieval construction in one catastrophic sweep. It forced London to rebuild, to rethink, to reshape itself. The city that rose from those ashes would be different, wider streets, more stone and brick, better planning. The Great Fire destroyed medieval London, but it created the possibility of something new. Rising above the river, the Tower of London in the 1600s stood as the physical embodiment of royal power. This period. It had evolved into multiple things simultaneously. A fortress, an arsenal storing weapons and gunpowder, a treasury safeguarding royal wealth, and one of the most notorious prisons in all of England. High-profile prisoners accused of treason, nobles, politicians, even queens were held within its walls, often awaiting trial or execution. The tower also housed royal records, the crown jewels themselves, and administrative offices. It wasn't just a place of punishment. It was a cornerstone of the English state, a reminder to everyone who saw it that royal authority was real, permanent, and absolute. Let's walk down Cheapside for a moment, one of London's most important streets in 1638. This scene shows a royal procession as Marie de' Medici entered the city to visit her daughter, Queen Henrietta Maria, and King Charles I. Cheapside wasn't merely a commercial thoroughfare where goods were bought and sold. It was a stage 4 royal display, lined with elaborate conduits providing water, stone crosses marking important spots, and temporary structures erected specially for grand public events. At the center stood the Cheapside Cross, a familiar landmark and gathering point for Londoners. Soldiers lined the route. Officials stood at attention. Crowds packed the street beneath banners and pageantry. Moments like this reflected the grandeur of monarchy, but they also revealed growing political and religious tensions simmering beneath the surface. Queen Henrietta Maria's Catholic faith and foreign origins deeply unsettled a city that was increasingly Protestant and suspicious of continental influence. England was drifting towards civil war, and processions like this were both celebration and warning. Today, this same stretch survives as modern Cheapside in the city of London, near St. Marylebone. The street remains, even as the medieval landmarks, the cross, the conduits. The old buildings have long since vanished. Now here's a view that captures a critical moment. Westminster in 1647, seen from across the Thames at a time when England itself was tearing itself apart. On the left stands the old Palace of Westminster, the seat of Parliament and the center of political power. By the mid-1600s, it had become the focal point of an explosive conflict between the monarchy and Parliament, especially during the brutal years of the English Civil War. Just beside it rises Westminster Hall, one of the oldest and grandest surviving parts of the palace. It was used for courts of law, state trials, and major public gatherings. Its vast timber roof symbolized royal authority for centuries, long before it became the stage for challenging that very authority in open court. To the right dominates Westminster Abbey, the spiritual heart of the nation. For generations, it had served as the site of coronations, royal funerals, and the burial place of kings and queens, reinforcing the sacred, almost mystical dimension of monarchy. In 1647, the abbey stood uneasily between tradition and upheaval, as religious divisions reshaped every English institution from top to bottom. At the center of the scene, you'll notice Westminster Stairs, a busy river landing where travelers arrived and departed by boat. Before bridges and paved roads dominated travel, the Thames functioned as London's main artery. Politicians, clergy, messengers, and ordinary citizens traveled directly by river to the doorstep of power. It was faster, often safer, and certainly more convenient than navigating London's chaotic, muddy streets. This etching shows the Palace of Whitehall in 1643, then the largest royal residence in England and the primary home of the monarch. From these river-facing steps, kings and courtiers arrived by boat, underscoring once again that the Thames was London's main route of travel and the avenue of power itself. Whitehall stretched along the riverside, but it wasn't one building. It was a sprawling, maze-like complex of halls, chambers, chapels, galleries, and administrative buildings where royal government was actually conducted day to day. Most of Whitehall was destroyed by fire at the end of the 17th century. Today, only the banqueting house survives, standing as the last physical remnant of what was once the beating heart of royal life and power in England. Let's venture slightly outside central London to Richmond Palace in the 16th and early 17th centuries. This was one of the most important royal residences beyond the city proper. Originally rebuilt by Henry VII on the site of a former medieval manor, Richmond became a favored retreat for Tudor and early Stuart monarchs. It offered cleaner air, more space, and an escape from the increasingly crowded, disease-ridden streets of London. It was here that Elizabeth I spent her final days, dying at the palace in 1603 and marking the end of the Tudor dynasty. After her death, Richmond gradually fell out of use. Over time, it was dismantled, stone by stone. Today, its grounds form part of modern Richmond, with only faint traces of walls and the original layout surviving beneath the streets and riverside paths. If you know where to look, you can still find fragments of a world that once held queens and shaped English history. Standing here looking back at these moments through these reconstructions, it's genuinely hard not to feel how close the past actually is. We think of history as this distant, unreachable thing, but these streets still exist. You can walk down modern Cheapside, stand beside St. Magnus, the Martyrs' Church, visit Westminster Abbey, wander through Richmond. The buildings may have changed, been rebuilt, or vanished entirely, but the places remain. The past isn't gone, it's layered beneath the present, waiting to be rediscovered. These streets, these buildings, these events shaped the world we inhabit today. Through these AI reconstructions, we get just a tantalizing glimpse of what it was actually like to be there, to walk those streets, to cross that impossible bridge, to witness history as it unfolded. If there's another city you're curious about, another moment in time you'd love to see brought back to life, or a historic scene that's always fascinated you, drop it in the comments. I'd genuinely love to keep building this journey into the past with all of you. Every suggestion opens another door into a world we can never visit but can, perhaps, briefly see again. Smash that like button if this changed how you see London, and subscribe because we're traveling through time together, and there are so many more incredible places waiting to be read. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in history.